Hi, everyone. This is Abhishek from ShakeTheCosmos.com. My guest today is Nick Livingston, CEO of Honeit Software. And I'm really excited to talk to him. And if you're listening right now, now is a good time to hit the subscribe button or follow button and give this episode a rating. And Nick and I met originally, well, actually, we met over the phone when I needed some help with my ideas. And he asked really intelligent questions to advance my ideas. And actually, I've implemented some of them in my Shake the Cosmos course. And you can go check it out at shakethecosmos.com. So, enough about me. And I'm excited to talk about Honeit. We're going to talk about some relevant topics, how Honeit software and platform has evolved, how it helps employers, as well as some job search strategies that Nick can share with us. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Nick. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Abhishek. Nice to be here.
All right. So we're going to jump right into it. And I want to kind of get into a little bit of the journey that you took and also the pivots. So I imagine many people have an idea and they're sort of stuck in where to go next. And you definitely didn't just have an idea, you made it a reality. What was your thought process, and like, why did you decide to invest your time and money into this?
Great question. I kind of fell into the world of recruiting, as a lot of recruiters do. You don't really go to school to be a recruiter, but it's this profession that kind of found me. I enjoyed technology. I moved to New York City to be a talent scout in the music business, but I graduated at the time of Napster and all this, all the challenges in the music business, but I discovered that technical talent were kind of the new rock stars, so to speak. And so, the idea of how do you find a rock star engineer and get them hired, that was all kind of enticing to me. And so got a job as a recruiter. And, fast forward, ended up going to Haas and business school, and quickly learned about how other departments, yeah, there you go. Learned about how other functions were using data to make better decisions. And then I'd come back to my day job, and myself and my recruiters at TubeMogul, we were still kind of scribbling notes and sharing opinions, and we wondered why the interview process and the hiring process was inefficient and ambiguous and subjective and slow, right? And so there was this kind of disconnect between the way I think about things and my math and physics background and data to that of my profession, HR, recruiting, right? And I said, there's this gap. We're not using data to make better decisions. We're sharing opinions and scribbled notes, and that's not sufficient if you're trying to make good decisions and move quickly. So, going to business school at Haas was kind of the impetus of there's a disconnect. And then when I met James and Kim, the co-founders of Honeit, here were two technical engineers who were frustrated with the interview process, from talking to non-technical recruiters and saying, why does it take 2 months to get a job? So it was a really good kind of meeting folks who felt the pain from the other side, and then building technology that could help me as a recruiter, help candidates, help hiring managers, move faster through the interview experience.
That's awesome, and I think it's essentially schedule, screen, and submit talent faster. I wonder, you mentioned James and Kim. How did you were you guys? I mean, I would love to know the story. How did you meet them? Please tell me this was a Berkeley a business school or something.
Well, we went that route originally. I started trying to brainstorm with some other technical co-founders previously on like, hey, we've got this idea, how do you improve the interview experience, interview technology, right? And then kind of start and stop, right? People are interested in solving the problem, but then maybe they take a job, and they get sidetracked, or so ultimately I actually found James and Kim on AngelList, which is, was an early kind of website, around matching startups and founders and things like that. So had a couple of coffee meetings and then a dinner, and then we decided to formalize everything. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, and in terms of like, what impact has, like, I guess, over time, what has evolved with the platform or yourself as well, as you started, it sounds like at Berkeley you started this, and then you, so yeah, what's happened with the platform and what's happened with you?
Yeah, so from a business perspective, we've gone through a couple pivots. Like that was challenging and difficult, right? Originally, we had built a platform to help job seekers practice interviewing and get better at interviewing by talking to experts in their industry, right? And kind of do mock interviews with an expert network. We realized that was too much to bite, kind of three-sided network. So we kind of white labeled that and packaged it, tried another kind of secondary approach at that. And then ultimately came back to what I know, which was schedule, screen, submit as a recruiter. Instead of the back and forth scheduling calls, we built kind of the Calendly alternative, right? So it's just a link that can automatically schedule interviews. Instead of frantically typing notes during an interview, you can record and transcribe the call. So it's searchable and indexable, and you can search questions and answers and insights contained in those conversations. And then the submit or the share part is usually a recruiter, spends 30 minutes on the phone, hangs up the phone, and has to then type paragraphs to try to express why a candidate, and that's just, again, we're going from conversations to text. We're losing a lot, we're misinterpreting a lot, and a hiring manager doesn't want to read that or trust a recruiter. So we're sharing sound bites or snippets or highlights from conversations, right? So imagine hanging up the phone after a 30-minute interview and sharing a couple of key answers with someone else to listen to. And so
I also feel there's a human component added all of a sudden now, because if it was just an email, it's hard to tell the tone. But I hear Abhishek on the phone now all of a sudden, and maybe his passion maybe comes across. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, and I think the other difference, the tools that I was getting pitched as a recruiting director were all trying to remove the conversation from the process. They were trying to say, "Oh, send a candidate a chatbot to screen them out, or send candidates a one-way video interview tool where you can say, 'Dear candidate, thank you for expressing interest. Please use this link to record yourself, answer these 6 questions, and then maybe someone will talk to you.'" I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. If you're trying to recruit engineers and product managers and VPs of marketing and talented folks like, the top talent, they're interviewing you, right? You're not interviewing them. So if you add steps or homework or friction, they're going to talk to your competitors. And so we were like, how do we build a technology that's still focused on conversations counting, but the data and the insights contained in those conversations? And so, like, if you've heard of Gong, if you've heard of Chorus, they're doing this for sales conversations, right? They recognize that the best sellers in your organizations do different things than the worst sellers, and they can analyze conversations to extract those insights and share those learnings with the greater sales organization to figure out how do we all level up. Well, just like the best sports teams, they watch play tape to get better. Well, if recruiters and hiring teams and interview teams aren't capturing our interviews, how do we get better? How do we rewind the tape on a good hire versus a bad hire to see what went right, or to see what went wrong? And so interview data, interview intelligence kind of unlocks those conversations and lets us figure out why this person we hired who didn't look good on paper turned out to be a rock star, right?
Yeah, and then so this interview intelligence piece, and this term, what kind of changes can a company start to make once they kind of realize that this is another piece of data that can be leveraged?
Yeah, I think the what we're just trying to get out there is just the idea that interview conversations are content, right? Interview conversations, if you look at content, you can search content. You can you can analyze content. You can so it's a bit of a leap, and I think recruiting and HR is behind, right? Support teams have been recording conversations for quality control and training for 20, 30 years. Sales organizations have been recording conversations for 5 years, let's say. Well, we think interview conversations are business conversations as well. And there's a lot to be gained when you start to look into what was asked, and more interesting, what makes a great answer to any given question.
Yeah. What makes a great answer on your platform?
Well, I think it's recruiters don't necessarily know, right? And I think the fundamental disconnect in recruiting is that the hiring managers and the candidates speak the same language, whether it's QA automation or web analytics or finance, right? And then you have someone in the middle who's trying to explain an opportunity to a candidate and there's misinterpretation, communication downstream. Or they talk to a candidate, now they're trying to explain what that candidate said upstream to a hiring manager, and there's misinterpretation and miscommunication in that direction as well. So it's like recruiters have been the interpreters and the translators, but we don't speak the same language as the candidates and hiring managers we're talking to. So I think with data, we're kind of able to solve that problem. And actually through the Honeit system, we're seeing candidates be able to answer interview questions in their native language. Like, imagine being able to answer in your native language and not your second language. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but I tell you what, I would not want to interview in Spanish, you know?
Oh man, I didn't think about that. So there could be, I mean, this could be used by, I guess. Oh, interesting. So I guess what's been like, are there it's like Spanish speakers, and I guess language being a barrier sometimes. Are you getting requests from people wanting it in other like global languages? And
Well, I mean, recruiting is global, right? And we know the world is flat, and the talent, it's now, especially with remote interviewing and remote hiring. I mean, it's only accelerated over the last 7 or 8 months, right? So the idea that a recruiter can sit anywhere and talk to a candidate anywhere, and for companies to essentially hire people anywhere, it really, this idea of remote interview communication gets really interesting really quick, right? And the idea is, how do you then, as a team, when there are multiple people involved in the hiring process, let's say a recruiter and a hiring manager and 2 or 3 interviewers, the panelists, and then maybe an executive or a co-founder who's the final decision maker. How do you get all of those people aligned and involved in what a role is? Like, what's the job we're trying to fill, and make sure everybody's just on the same page there? And, the inputs of what this candidate has said so far. Like, instead of all of us repeating ourselves and answering the candidate the same questions, let's build upon each conversation and even remove some steps from the hiring process by collaborating.
yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking like everybody kind of sometimes people want a summary of the candidate and just the insights instead of like everything at once as well. So it's nice to have that.
Yeah, I think just, we're all the human beings, like we kind of all like to hear it for ourselves, and we kind of know talent when we hear it. But historically, that's required 7 separate conversations with the same candidate for everybody to kind of hear it and get to the aha. Well, when you start to think of interview conversations as content, as data, you can now share it, right? So one person can facilitate a great technical interview and share some insights or highlights or sound bites from that call with 3 other people. And now, you've got 4 people who can hear the same answers and then assess a candidate from one conversation potentially, rather than 7 separate conversations, which takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money.
Oh yeah, so it's essentially very scalable in that aspect too. Um, Interesting.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, we're seeing, especially like an external recruiter, let's say, they talk to a great candidate looking for a job. They can now share a few highlights with 4 clients, and each of those 4 clients can listen to a few key answers and say, wow, you know what? Abhishek sounds great. That was a great answer to web analytics. Let's get him on site, or let's skip him to a call with the VP. We don't need to do the 2 other phone calls. So timing is everything. And it's all about, how do we efficiently screen and assess candidates together?
all right. So I know I kind of want to shift to also, we were talking about remote as well. And of course, kind of want to understand your own journey as well a little bit. Like, I know this is an international conversation right now.
Yeah, I lived in the Bay Area for a number of years, while working at TubeMogul and going to Berkeley Haas, in the evenings and weekends, and then had my 3rd daughter, and ultimately just the cost of living in the Bay Area got to be a lot, and we were bootstrapping Honeit, right? And so the idea of bootstrapping a company is nearly impossible, if you're living in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there's this kind of conundrum around, how do you get to a point in your career when you have enough deep insights into a particular problem, yet, without raising around, or raising venture capital money, how do you start a business? Just like going to business school part-time, it's hard to to quit your job and quit working, quit making money to do something. So similarly, like pursuing the night program or the weekend program at Berkeley, we've been bootstrapping Honeit, and I moved to Costa Rica 4 years ago, and we've been doing this thing as a remote company, and cost of living is better. School's great down here. Healthcare is cheaper down here. They've got fiber internet down here. We're 2 hours from Houston, so time zone's great. And you forget that you can get things done, and you can do things globally, right? As an organization.
Yeah, I feel like that's more than ever now, especially with a lot of things being remote. And was that a tough decision to make? And like, what was the planning like to just kind of move? I mean, from it's Bay Area. It's not like just Bay Area to San Diego. This is like Bay Area to Tamarindo, which is a beautiful town. I've been there.
Oh, you have? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, little surf town. I mean, it sounds like it is, right? But I think ultimately, um, it wasn't that crazy. It was like, let's rent out our house, like let's sublet our house for 6 months to see if we can do it, right? We put our stuff in the garage or the attic, and we sublet it for 6 months. And then we said, hey, this is going pretty well. It's not that different. You wake up, you get your kids into school, you have your coffee, you log into the computer, and you're on the computer all day, right? Anyway, and so then we extended it for 6 months, and then we extended it for a year, right? And then we sold our house, and we, kept on keeping on. And so, yeah, I think it was like, we met families down here that like sell everything and sell all their furnishings and take a leap. We didn't do it. It was a bit more of a structured approach. But once you get down here, there's a lot of expats down here from US, from Canada, from Europe, from Australia, who all either have jobs that are virtual or start businesses down here. I think one of the coolest things about living in a small town is that you forget how entrepreneurial small towns are. Right? This is the family that owns the restaurant. This is the family that, runs the hotel. This is the family that, is this person's the bartender that also makes something and sells at the Thursday night market, right? Like everybody's hustling to build something, and it's pretty exciting. You don't really think about small towns having that entrepreneurial energy.
Yeah, and I think I remember going to Berkeley, and I commuted from Sacramento, and I actually used to worry about that. Like, do I have to be in this particular area to always feel innovative and all this like energy, and as well? But I kind of liked being in Sacramento sometimes and just kind of think and on my own as well. So, and this small business angle that you're talking about, I mean, yeah, like. And I'm really intrigued by your journey as well, because, and I've actually, it's interesting you mentioned this. There have been people approaching me about like, the people are really looking at the world as options. Like, how can they do this? So this is kind of cool.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, COVID. I mean, obviously it's scary, and it's the uncertainty around everything can be scary, right? But I think it's also an opportunity for us to kind of look at education, to look at healthcare, and to look at all these institutions that we've done a certain way for so long, and the idea that kids can log in and have, like our kids right now with COVID, the Zoom stuff didn't work so well 100%, right? So what we did, we created kind of a little micro school with a few kids. There's an online curriculum from the States that's accredited, and they can learn from a teacher here. But then we have a physical teacher supplementing and making sure things get done, because, for any parents that have tried to do the Zoom thing from home, it's as much work for the parent as it is, especially with young kids, right? And so, but imagine being able to learn from the best teachers in the world about a particular topic. I mean, I think that's what education could be, and we've got the technology, So I think this world of remote really is kind of opening opportunity, for people to not necessarily have the house they can't afford and do the job they don't want to pay the mortgage, and just that cycle, right, that we all catch ourselves in, that you can live in a small town in Kansas and still work for an interesting company. I'm from Kansas originally, and great people, not a lot of tech companies, but there's a huge opportunity to pay less in rent and still solve interesting problems, but solve the problems you want to solve, not the problems that you feel like you have to get the salary to pay for the mortgage, etc.
I'm sensing just like a very strong like problem solving abilities over there, Nick, as well. Like just in terms of solving this recruitment problem for employers, but then also kind of designed your own life for yourself in Costa Rica as well, and I love that. Um, in terms of like, what do you see as like the future for recruiting now? With this we of course like in a dynamic environment.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think the world of work has shifted, right? Now there's been a lot of layoffs, there's been a lot of downsizing, there's a lot of active job seekers, right? Which is kind of scary. It's like, what are the new jobs that are going to be created that get people back to work? Or is it going to be more split schedules where and people can work that 3 to 4 day week that we probably all would love, if we sacrifice salary? Well, if we don't live in the expensive cities, we can, live off a 3 day salary or 4 day salary, and again, so there's some opportunities there, I think, around shifting work.
Totally. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the shifting work is definitely interesting, and it comes back to like the personal preferences people have. Like, I just met a guy who works at national parks, and he was like, I don't get paid a lot, but guess what? I get to be in nature all the time, and people pay to be in nature. We're like, so it's interesting how perspective matters.
Artists, I mean, think about all the people who have a day job that would rather be doing their hobby or their art or their craft, right? But that, only get to do that a few hours on the weekend, right? Because they've got their day job. I mean, my wife and I, we both had full-time jobs in the Bay Area, and getting home at 7 p.m. and, both having full-time jobs to be able to have someone else kind of raise our kids. It's just like a decision you have to make. Here we can live with one maybe salary, let's say, or do consulting work or whatnot. I think the other thing that's interesting, companies are probably reevaluating, and this could be good or bad, or reevaluating how many people they need doing certain things in their company, right? How many marketers does it take to create a campaign? Like, how big does your marketing team need to be with new tools and marketing tools and things like that? And, all of that is amplified with this idea of the gig economy, right? And, be able to hire someone who's really good at this little thing without hiring someone full time to do that thing. And so I don't have an answer for you, Abhishek, but I think it's all very confusing. But I do think the idea of, there's the ability to do things that you want to do is probably more interesting than ever. And I think the ability then to have your family life or to focus on some of the other things that are important to us are probably more possible than they've been, in previous years too.
Totally. And I wonder, like, you being on the sort of the other side of the hiring practices and stuff, what secret tips would you have for candidates looking for jobs today?
That's a great question. It's funny. I kind of think back when you say that. It makes you flash back to me moving to New York, like with my guitar, like wanting to work in the music business. And I remember like applying to all these like probably director level jobs, like director of music licensing. That sounds cool. I'd love to do that. You know what I mean? And just realizing now, like, I was super unqualified for like a lot of those jobs I was applying to, and to maybe just kind of reset and think about like, okay, that's a cool job at an interesting company, but maybe I'm not qualified for that. Let me use a tool like a LinkedIn to see who the hiring manager might be for that job. If it was a director role, maybe it's the VP. If it was a manager role, maybe it's the director at that company. And let me like take a second to think a little bit more about, okay, if that's not the right role, what other roles in that company are currently available? Or what would I have to say to some hiring manager to have them maybe flex that role? Maybe they don't need a director. Maybe they could get away with someone at half the salary who's super ambitious and super motivated to help them out because of X, Y, and Z. So, I think there is flexibility with jobs, right? And a lot of times a company posts a job description with what their ideal candidate is, but knowing the 16 bullet points are probably all not going to be checked off by the person they hire, right? And there's certain, like, what are the most important bullet points for this particular role? And then I think it's also, when people are making hiring decisions, they ultimately want to hire people who are super motivated to solve the problem and work at their company. So I think when you're expressing interest in a job, it's answering the question, and maybe you're talking to a recruiter, of like, why you want to work there. And if the recruiter hears it and can pass that along to excite the next person, that can better your odds. So I know it's kind of a roundabout question, but I think it's like, what's realistic for based on your experience, and what would someone pay you for to do that thing at this company? And then it's really thinking for a job seeker to think about, if you're interested in sports, you can go work at a sports company, right? Go work. If you like baseball, go work for a baseball company. If you like badminton, go work for a badminton manufacturer, like whatever it is. And you can tie your interests to the role that you do for a company. I mean, I think that's best in case, right? And I think if you can articulate that in a cover letter, or if you can articulate that in a LinkedIn message to a recruiter or to a hiring manager, I think that'll stand out from the competition. And again, answer that question of like, hey, this person wants to work here. They're just not looking for any job.
And then, I mean, I myself am an example of your advice. Actually, I think about your tip number one, where, just looking at jobs, and, if it's a director level job, or who is the VP, or kind of approaching them. And like, I remember looking at product management jobs, and when you're trying to get in, I would apply to the associate product manager job. And sometimes during the interview, they're like, oh, this guy's really good. Why don't we final offer is actually going to be a product manager. So it's interesting. Like, you talk about this flexibility companies have, and about jobs.
The other strategy there, Abhishek, is a lot of folks that graduate from college, they'll want to work at a Facebook, right? And again, you're also thinking about like, wow, like everybody's thinking that. So your chances of getting that product manager job at Facebook, if you haven't been a product manager at another, sophisticated tech company with scale and millions of users, is probably unlikely. Well, what if you could be a product manager in another industry, or maybe a less, popular software company, and you cut your teeth, you learn the foundations, you get a 3-year job on your resume of being a product manager at a web company doing this thing. And then you use that in a couple of years to leverage to say, okay, I want to go from a company building something like this to a company building something like this. Or once you make that next move, you can say, hey, okay, now I'm working at a consumer-facing software company with 2 million users. I want to take a lateral move to get that product manager job at a Facebook where I can impact 1 billion users. And so, the other thing I'd probably share with someone is, if you're changing jobs, maybe only focus on changing one thing, right? If you want to change location, maybe you do take a lateral move in the same industry, and then you just focus on changing that location. If you want to change industries, maybe you stay in the same location, stay in the same role, but now I want to go from health tech to ad tech. And you just focus on changing that one thing. And that's going to be less risky for the employer, less variables for a recruiter to consider, right, when they're considering you. Or if you want to level up and go up the ladder, stay in the same location, potentially in the same industry, and now go for that director level role.
Interesting. And as we're kind of wrapping up here, how can people get in touch with you? And then also, any exciting things? How can people get in touch with you?
So Honeit.com. My email is nick@honeit, HONEIT.com. Feel free to send an email. Happy to chat about recruiting. Happy to chat about hiring. It's something I'm super passionate about. trying to improve, that experience for everyone. So.
Thanks so much. And if you're listening, Nick's email is in the podcast description as well. So hit him up. All right. Well, thanks so much, Nick.
Thanks, Abhishek. Have a great one. Appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening. Please hit the subscribe button. We'll be back next week